While I was waiting for the Spectrum Next to turn up, I did some background reading on the Spectrum and the Next. I'll run through the books I've been reading and talk about my thoughts on them. I didn't have a Spectrum, so I was happy to look at a variety of books, and they may be of interest to someone who's getting into the Next, or maybe waiting for one like me, or has one of the first release, or who is generally interested in the Spectrum. Some of these books were free or low cost. In total, I don't think I spent more than £20. I was quite happy reading PDF versions of these books. I'm not collecting them, just finding out about the Spectrum computers. The first book I read was the original Spectrum manual. I found the PDF on the internet. This was to get up to speed on the original Spectrum before starting looking at the Next. The next book I read was the story of the Sinclair ZX Spectrum in Pixels by Chris Wilkins. It was a nice overview of the Spectrum, a beautifully made book which I bought. Covered the story of its history and development, covered some of the classic games, and included memoirs of people in the scene which I've still to read. The next book was a little book of Spectrum games by Chris Wilkins. It showed what was possible with the original Spectrum in terms of games. It allowed me to see which games I wanted to try playing first on C-Spect, the Spectrum Next emulator, which had the best graphics, and which were closest to the 16-bit platform I was familiar with, and how games had moved on from the ZX81. I don't have the nostalgia element of liking games I played as a kid on the Spectrum, as I didn't have one, so I'm picking out games based on my current view of them. I'm thinking about what styles of games I might want to create on the Next in the future when it arrives. The next two books were free PDF books that I found on machine code on the Spectrum. The first was Spectrum Machine Language for the Absolute Beginner by William Tang. It provided a reminder of ZX81 assembler concepts, but it used a fingers and feet concept that I wasn't too keen on, but some people might like this. The second machine code book was Mastering Machine Code on Your ZX Spectrum by Tony Baker. Again, it was an introduction to the Z80, or for some people a refresher. The chapter I was the most interested in was Chapter 8, A Dictionary of Machine Code. This gave an explanation of every machine code instruction used by the Spectrum. Both these books have information of interest to someone returning to Z80 coding, or who is maybe thinking about starting with it. The next book I read was ZX Spectrum Games Code Club. It described the process of making basic games on the Spectrum, but some of these concepts could be applied to assembly programming also. I'm not planning to start coding in BASIC again. Looking at the listings, I find them difficult to read having worked with more modern programming languages. Lack of white space in the listing and indentation make the code difficult to read. Line numbers in Goto seem alien now to me. Also, multiple statements on one line can get pretty unreadable. A 32-column display is not good for displaying code. I've seen a BASIC compiler which may be of interest to someone who's been programming with modern languages, as it solves some of the issues I've just mentioned. But if you really want to go the BASIC route, this isn't a bad book. The next book was Micro Kids, an 80s adventure with the ZX Spectrum. It's a fictional account of growing up with the Spectrum. Not read it yet, I'm saving it for Christmas for a bit of nostalgia. And then the last book is the Spectrum Next manual. I got this by following a link on the Spectrum Next Facebook group. I don't want to read the PDF cover to cover as I want to keep it for when the Next arrives. I did skim through it and read bits relevant to my game development, but there are clearly some bits that will need close attention, such as the screen display when I get onto reading it. I'm looking forward for the printed manual to arrive, which no doubt I will pore over like my first Sinclair ZX81 manual.